Chosen one, your soulmate's name appeared in a strange message. Who sent it and why? My beloved child, pause for just a second, because the strange message connected to your soulmate may not be as random as it first appeared. Somewhere between an ordinary moment and an unexpected notification, something has shifted. A name appeared where you never expected to see it. Perhaps it was a message, a screen, an email, a passing conversation, or a sentence that suddenly carried a familiar name. You may have looked twice. You may have wondered whether it was coincidence. But what if the real story is not simply that your soulmate's name appeared? What if the deeper question is why it appeared at this particular moment in your life? There are moments that look insignificant when they arrive, yet later become the exact point where everything begins to make sense. This could be one of those moments. And before you decide that it means nothing, look closer, because the person who sent that strange message may have revealed something without realizing the weight of their words. Imagine yourself sitting quietly, moving through an ordinary part of your day, when suddenly your attention is captured by something completely unexpected. A notification appears. You open it without thinking much about it. Then you see the name. Your soulmate's name. Not a name you were searching for. Not something you had deliberately brought into the conversation. It simply appeared. For a moment, everything around you seems slightly quieter. Your mind begins asking questions faster than you can answer them. Why now? Why this person? Why that message? And most importantly, who sent it? There is a fascinating pattern in human experience. Sometimes the information that changes our perspective does not arrive with dramatic music or an obvious announcement. It arrives disguised as something ordinary. A sentence. A message. A name. A tiny interruption in an otherwise normal day. Yet your awareness recognizes that something about it feels different. That feeling is worth examining, not because every coincidence has a predetermined meaning, but because unexpected moments can reveal what your attention has been preparing to notice. There is another layer here that makes this story even more intriguing. The strange message may not have been written specifically to reveal anything about your soulmate. The sender might have had an entirely different reason for reaching out. Perhaps they were sharing information. Perhaps they were responding to someone else. Perhaps they were passing along a detail without understanding how deeply it would affect you. And that is precisely what makes the situation unusual. The message may have carried two meanings at once, the meaning intended by the sender and the meaning created by what you suddenly noticed. One was conscious. The other was personal. And sometimes the second meaning is the one that stays with us. Think about that carefully. What if the person who sent the message was not trying to change anything at all, yet their words caused you to look at your own path differently? What if their message became a mirror, showing you something you had quietly been wondering about for a long time? Your soulmate's name appearing in a strange message can awaken a very specific kind of curiosity. It is not simply curiosity about the sender. It is curiosity about timing. You may begin remembering conversations, encounters, unfinished moments, or things your soulmate once said. Suddenly details that seem disconnected begin appearing in your mind together. You remember a particular expression. A particular place. A particular day. Maybe there was something unresolved between you. Maybe there was distance, uncertainty, or simply a period when neither of you knew what the future would bring. Then this message appears, and suddenly the past feels connected to the present in a way you did not expect. But here is where you must remain clear-minded. Do not rush to create a conclusion simply because something feels powerful. Instead, observe. Let the mystery breathe. Sometimes the most important truth reveals itself only after the first emotional reaction has passed. And there is something else you should notice. The message may have arrived at a moment when your own perspective was changing. Perhaps you had started thinking differently about love. Perhaps you had stopped forcing answers and begun allowing life to unfold naturally. Maybe you had become more focused on becoming the person you want to be rather than constantly wondering what another person might do. Then, unexpectedly, the name appears. That contrast matters. It can feel as though the past has knocked gently on the door of your present, not necessarily asking you to return to it, but asking you to understand it. Your soulmate's name might represent more than the individual. It could represent a chapter, a possibility, a lesson, a feeling, or a future you once imagined. The strange message becomes important because it interrupts your normal thought pattern and invites you to look again. Now consider the sender. Who would have the reason, opportunity, or connection to bring that name into your world? Could it be someone who knows both of you? Could it be someone connected to your soulmate without you realizing it? Could it be a person who simply happened to mention the name because of an unrelated situation? Or could there be information behind the message that you have not yet discovered? This is where the story becomes almost cinematic. One small message creates an invisible chain of questions. One name leads to another thought. One thought leads to a memory. A memory leads to a possibility. And suddenly, an ordinary notification has become the beginning of a much larger investigation into your own emotions and direction. You are not being asked to chase every clue. You are being invited to become more aware of what your intuition notices before your logical mind has finished processing the moment. There is a reason certain unexpected moments stay in our memory longer than they should. They touch something already alive inside us. If your soulmate's name had no emotional significance, you might have glanced at it and moved on. But you noticed. You stopped. You wondered. That response tells you something about your current inner landscape. It does not automatically predict what someone else will do, but it can reveal what matters to you. And perhaps that is the first purpose of the strange message. Before it tells you anything about your soulmate, it tells you something about yourself. It shows you that a certain connection still occupies a meaningful place in your awareness. It shows you that your story is not emotionally finished simply because the outside world has become quiet. Yet the timing remains fascinating. Why would the name appear now instead of yesterday or several months from now? There may be a simple explanation, of course. Technology creates countless accidental overlaps. People mention names. Messages travel between groups. Algorithms connect information in unexpected ways. But even when the external explanation is completely ordinary, the internal impact can still be extraordinary. A moment does not need to be supernatural to be meaningful. Sometimes meaning comes from what we choose to understand from the experience. Perhaps this message is encouraging you to stop waiting passively for certainty and start becoming ready for whatever comes next. Perhaps it is reminding you that your future cannot be built entirely from old assumptions. Maybe the appearance of that name is not a command to go backward. Maybe it is a signal to become more conscious of where you are going. And this is where the futuristic vision of your story begins. Imagine a future version of yourself looking back at this exact moment. Imagine knowing everything you will eventually learn about this connection, this person, and the choices that followed. From that future perspective, would this strange message still look like a meaningless coincidence? Or would you recognize it as the moment that made you pay attention? The future has a strange relationship with the present. We experience today without knowing which details will become important later. A conversation can become a memory. A memory can influence a decision. A decision can redirect an entire chapter of life. That is why awareness matters. You do not need to predict the future. You only need to notice what deserves your attention. There may also be something hidden in the wording of the message itself. Sometimes one phrase carries more weight than the rest. Maybe the sender used your soulmate's name casually, but included another detail that made you pause. Maybe the message referenced a location, event, date, or situation that connects to something you already know. Perhaps the name was accompanied by information you had never heard before. That is the part you should remember. The mystery may not be in the name alone. The real clue may be beside it. What came before the name? What came after it? Why did the sender choose those particular words? And why did your attention immediately focus on that one detail? These questions do not require fear or obsession. They require patience. Because sometimes the biggest revelation arrives after the first mystery seems to disappear. You might discover that the sender had a completely innocent reason for writing. And yet, through that ordinary reason, you may learn something unexpectedly important. Maybe you discover that your soulmate has been thinking about a change in their life. Maybe you learn that a shared connection still exists between your worlds. Maybe the message leads to a conversation that had been delayed for a long time. Or perhaps nothing external happens at all, and instead you experience an internal shift. You finally understand what you want. You finally recognize what you deserve. You finally stop confusing uncertainty with destiny. That, too, can be a turning point. So do not dismiss the message, but do not let the mystery control you either. Hold it gently. Look at it from every angle. Let curiosity exist beside wisdom. If the message carries a genuine connection, clarity will eventually have room to emerge. If it was simply coincidence, you will still have gained something valuable by understanding your own reaction to it. Either way, you are not losing. You are becoming more aware. And there is something strangely beautiful about that. Sometimes life does not hand us an answer. It hands us a question powerful enough to change the way we search. Now, my beloved child, there is one detail about this strange message that may completely change how you interpret everything you have just heard. The sender may not be the person you first suspect. In fact, the identity of the sender could connect the message to a part of your soulmate story that you have never seen before. And once that connection becomes visible, the appearance of that familiar name may stop looking random altogether. So keep that question alive for a little longer. Who really sent the message, and what were they trying to reveal without saying it directly? Because the next part of this story moves beyond the name itself and into the hidden connection behind it. What looked like a simple message may have opened a door you did not even know was there. My beloved child, there is a detail you may not have noticed yet, and it changes the entire atmosphere of this mystery. The name was not the only unusual thing about that message. It was the timing, the wording, and the strange connection surrounding the person who sent it. Sometimes a message becomes important not because of what it says directly, but because of what it quietly connects. And in your story, that connection may be closer than you think. You may have assumed the sender was simply another person passing information along. Someone with no real reason to be connected to your soulmate. But what if that assumption was wrong? What if the sender had a personal connection to your soulmate, a connection that had remained outside your awareness until this exact moment? Suddenly, the message becomes more than a random appearance of a familiar name. It becomes a small window into a story that has been developing somewhere beyond your view. Think back to the first second when you saw the message. There was probably a moment when your mind stopped moving normally. You read the sentence once, then perhaps read it again. The name stood out. Maybe you even wondered whether you had misunderstood what you were seeing. That reaction matters because your attention recognized something before you had enough information to explain it. But now ask yourself a deeper question. What if the person who sent that message did not realize that the name would affect you at all? What if, from their perspective, it was simply a normal message connected to their own circumstances? This possibility makes the situation even more interesting. The sender may not have been trying to create a mystery. They may simply have opened a door without knowing someone on the other side was waiting to notice it. There are people who exist quietly at the edges of our stories. They know someone we know. They have heard conversations we never heard. They have witnessed moments we were not present for. They may understand pieces of another person's life that have never reached us. Your soulmate may have an entire world of experiences that you have never seen, and the strange message could have briefly connected your world with theirs. Perhaps the sender knows your soulmate through work, friendship, family, travel, an old connection, or a completely unexpected circumstance. Perhaps they were discussing something that had nothing to do with romance, yet your soulmate's name appeared naturally within the conversation. That is where the mystery becomes subtle. Not every important clue arrives with an explanation. Some arrive quietly, waiting for you to understand them later. But there is another possibility. What if the sender knew exactly what they were doing? Not necessarily in a dramatic or manipulative way, but perhaps they knew that mentioning your soulmate would catch your attention. Maybe they had heard something about you. Maybe your name had appeared in a conversation connected to your soulmate. Maybe someone asked a question about the future, relationships, or an important decision, and your soulmate's response somehow brought your presence into the conversation. Imagine discovering that while you were wondering about them, they had also been discussing something related to you. That would change the emotional weight of the message completely. Suddenly, the strange appearance of the name would feel like two separate paths crossing at the same point. And here is where you need to slow down. Do not immediately assume the most exciting explanation. Let the truth earn its place. Mystery is powerful because it creates possibilities, but wisdom knows the difference between possibility and certainty. The message may contain a meaningful connection, but you do not have to force the answer before it is ready. Sometimes the strongest position is simply to remain curious. Ask questions. Observe patterns. Notice what changes naturally. If another piece of information appears, consider it. If a conversation opens, listen carefully. If nothing happens, allow the moment to remain what it was without creating a story that the evidence cannot support. Your awareness becomes stronger when you can hold wonder without losing balance. There is also something deeply emotional about seeing the name of someone who matters to you unexpectedly. You may have spent days, weeks, or even longer trying not to think too much about what could happen between you. You may have told yourself that you should simply move forward and let life unfold. Then suddenly, their name appears in a place where it does not seem to belong. It can feel as though the past has briefly reached into the present. Memories begin returning. Their voice. Their expression. A conversation you never finished. A moment you wished had lasted longer. And perhaps one particular question rises above all the others. Did they ever think about me the way I thought about them? That question can be powerful, but it can also become a doorway into something more meaningful. Instead of asking only what your soulmate might be thinking, ask what this moment is showing you about your own readiness. Are you prepared for clarity? Are you prepared to hear something you did not expect? Are you prepared for a future that may look different from the one you imagined? Sometimes we focus so intensely on whether another person will return that we forget to ask whether we have become the person who can receive a healthier, clearer connection. Your future is not only about who appears in it. It is also about who you become before they arrive. This is why the strange message may be more significant than it initially seems. It interrupts your usual emotional pattern. If you were stuck between hope and uncertainty, the message forces you to notice what still matters. If you were beginning to release the past, it gives you an opportunity to examine whether you are truly ready to move forward. If you were waiting for an external sign, it challenges you to understand that signs alone cannot build a relationship. Communication, honesty, timing, and mutual choice matter. A mysterious name can awaken curiosity, but real connection eventually requires real clarity. Now imagine the sender's perspective. They type the message. They press send. Perhaps they continue with their day without another thought. They have no idea that their words have created a completely different emotional experience for you. That is one of the strangest things about human connection. We rarely know how far our smallest actions travel. A sentence can reach someone we never expected. A name can awaken a memory. A simple message can begin a conversation that changes the direction of someone's life. The sender may have been only one link in a chain, but without that link, you might never have noticed what was happening around you. And perhaps the most unexpected part is this. The sender might have received the information from your soulmate directly. Think about that possibility without rushing to believe it. Maybe your soulmate mentioned a plan. Maybe they talked about someone important from their past. Maybe they were asked a question about who they could imagine building a future with. Maybe your name came up naturally. The sender could have carried that information forward without realizing how significant it would become once it reached you. If that is what happened, the strange message was not created by one person. It was the final visible point of a much longer chain of conversations. You may be wondering why your soulmate would allow your name to enter such a conversation in the first place. The answer could be simpler than you expect. People talk about what occupies their thoughts. They mention people who have left an impression. They revisit moments that remain unresolved. They discuss possibilities when the future feels open. Your soulmate may not have said everything they feel, but a name can sometimes reveal where the mind naturally travels. Not as proof of a guaranteed future, but as evidence that a particular person still exists somewhere inside their awareness. And what if the sender was not simply passing information along? What if they were testing the waters? Perhaps they wanted to see your reaction. Perhaps they knew there was history between you and your soulmate. Maybe they sensed that something remained unfinished and wanted to open a conversation without making the first statement too direct. This happens in human relationships more often than people realize. Sometimes people communicate indirectly because they are uncertain about how the other person will respond. A name becomes a bridge. A question becomes an invitation. A casual message becomes the first movement toward a deeper conversation. If this mystery has already made you think about your own soulmate story, then let yourself acknowledge that feeling without becoming consumed by it. And if this story is resonating with you, you can share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes hearing another person's perspective helps us see a situation from an angle we had completely missed. If you enjoy stories that explore mystery, awareness, emotional connection, and the possibilities hidden inside ordinary moments, staying connected through the channel can also make sure you do not miss what comes next. Now return to the message. There may have been one phrase that looked completely ordinary but carried an unusual weight. Perhaps the sender used a word that your soulmate often uses. Maybe they mentioned a location that holds a shared memory. Maybe the message arrived shortly after something happened in your own life that made you think about the future. These details can create a sense of alignment, but remember, alignment should invite observation, not blind certainty. The goal is not to turn every coincidence into a prophecy. The goal is to recognize when a moment has become meaningful enough to deserve your attention. There is a fascinating psychological reason why names can feel so powerful. A familiar name is not merely a collection of letters. It carries memories, emotions, expectations, and unfinished questions. When you encounter that name unexpectedly, your brain can instantly activate an entire network of associations. Suddenly the person feels closer, even though nothing external has changed. That emotional intensity can make the moment feel almost futuristic, as though the present has briefly connected with a possible version of your future. But perhaps that feeling is useful. Perhaps it reminds you that your future is still being written, and that your choices today can influence which possibilities become real. You may eventually discover that the sender had no hidden intention at all. And strangely enough, that would not make the moment meaningless. It would simply shift the meaning. Maybe the message arrived because you needed to recognize that you were still emotionally attached to an old possibility. Maybe it encouraged you to seek clarity instead of living inside assumptions. Maybe it reminded you that love should not require constant guessing. Or perhaps it opened the path toward a genuine conversation that had been waiting for the right opportunity. But there is another detail we have not explored yet. What happened after the message appeared? Did the sender follow up? Did another message arrive? Did your soulmate suddenly become more visible in your world? Did someone mention them again? Or did everything become strangely quiet? Silence after an unexpected message can be just as interesting as another notification. Because silence creates space for truth to reveal itself. If something is real, it does not need endless pressure to remain alive. It can survive a pause. It can return naturally. It can become clearer with time. And this is where your story begins moving toward its most intriguing question. The sender may have been connected to your soulmate, but there could be another person involved, someone who knows a part of the story that neither you nor the sender has fully explained. That third connection could reveal why the name appeared when it did. It could explain why the message arrived through that particular person instead of someone closer to you. It could even reveal that the message was never really about the past at all. It may have been connected to something your soulmate is preparing to do next. So stay a little longer with this mystery. You might miss the turning point if you assume the story has already explained itself. The name was only the beginning. The sender was the first hidden connection. But behind that connection is a question much more personal. What was your soulmate doing, thinking, or deciding at the exact time your name entered that conversation? Because once you understand that part, the strange message may suddenly look less like an accident and more like the beginning of a conversation that has not yet fully reached you. The mystery has moved one step deeper now, because the question is no longer only who sent the strange message, but what was happening behind the scenes when your soulmate's name suddenly appeared. There are moments when a single detail seems to arrive from nowhere, yet when you look closely, you realize it was connected to several things already moving beneath the surface. Perhaps that is what happened here. The message may have been the visible part of a conversation, a decision, or an emotional realization that had already begun somewhere else. You saw the final thread, but you did not see where the thread started. And that is why this moment continues to stay in your mind. Something about it feels unfinished. Something about it seems to be asking you to look beyond the obvious explanation. Think about the possibility that your soulmate had recently been asked a question they were not prepared to answer quickly. Maybe someone asked them about their future. Maybe they were talking about relationships, commitment, personal changes, or the kind of person they could genuinely see beside them in the years ahead. The conversation may have started casually, with no dramatic intention at all. But then your soulmate's name appeared in someone else's message to you. That connection is what makes the timing so interesting. Sometimes a person's deepest thoughts do not appear through direct statements. They surface through the subjects they return to, the names they mention, and the memories they cannot completely leave behind. Perhaps your soulmate had been trying to understand something about you. Maybe they had wondered whether you still cared. Maybe they had questioned whether too much time had passed. Maybe they were uncertain about whether reaching out would create something beautiful or reopen something complicated. People can carry questions for a long time without asking them aloud. They can imagine conversations that never happen. They can write messages and delete them. They can look at a familiar name and wonder what would happen if they finally stopped remaining silent. If your soulmate was in that kind of emotional space, then the strange message may have arrived at a surprisingly meaningful point. Not because destiny forced an outcome, but because two separate worlds were beginning to move toward the same question. And there is something you should understand about timing. Timing does not always mean that an event must happen immediately. Sometimes timing simply means that you are finally ready to notice what was previously invisible. A message that would have meant nothing to you 6 months ago might suddenly feel significant today because your perspective has changed. You may have become more emotionally mature. You may have stopped chasing certainty. You may have learned to recognize the difference between longing and genuine connection. That growth changes the way you interpret everything around you. The message did not necessarily become different. You became different. Now imagine that your soulmate was also changing during this same period. Perhaps they had been reconsidering certain choices. Perhaps their priorities had shifted. Maybe something in their life had made them think more seriously about what they wanted from the future. Sometimes a person does not realize what matters most until life becomes quiet enough for them to hear their own thoughts. In that quiet, old connections can return to the mind. Not because someone is trapped in the past, but because certain people represent possibilities that were never fully understood. Your soulmate may have started remembering moments with you differently. A conversation that once seemed ordinary may now feel important. A small gesture may suddenly carry a deeper meaning. And when a person begins revisiting those memories, their name may eventually enter conversations with others. This is where the sender becomes interesting again. Maybe the sender noticed a change in your soulmate before you did. Maybe they saw that certain topics made your soulmate pause. Maybe they heard your name mentioned more than once. Maybe they recognized that there was an emotional connection that had never been completely explained. People close to someone often notice these small changes. They may not know the entire story, but they can sense when a person's attention keeps returning to the same place. The sender may have become an accidental witness to something your soulmate had not yet expressed directly. What if the sender's message was actually connected to a question your soulmate had asked? Imagine someone saying, "Do you remember this person?" Or perhaps your soulmate asked about you without wanting anyone to know how much the answer mattered. Maybe the sender later contacted you for an apparently unrelated reason, but your soulmate's name appeared naturally in the conversation. That would explain why the message felt strange. You were seeing a fragment of a conversation that had existed before you ever received the notification. You were not looking at the beginning. You were looking at the aftermath. But there is a deeper possibility that deserves your attention. What if your soulmate had recently made a decision about their future, and the message was connected to that decision? Perhaps they decided to stop avoiding an important conversation. Perhaps they decided to clarify what they truly wanted. Perhaps they began considering a change that would eventually bring your paths closer again. We cannot know that simply from a message, and we should not pretend certainty where there is none. But the possibility explains why the moment feels so emotionally charged. The message could be touching the edge of a decision that has not yet become visible in your world. Your future may already contain possibilities that your present mind cannot see. Think of a city at night from high above. You can see thousands of lights, roads, and intersections, but from the ground, you only experience one street at a time. Life can feel the same way. You are walking through one moment, while countless other choices and conversations are developing elsewhere. A strange message can feel like a tiny glimpse from above, a brief view of a road you did not know was connected to yours. It does not tell you exactly where the road leads. It simply reminds you that your current perspective is not the entire picture. That is why you should not feel pressured to decode everything immediately. The most meaningful discoveries often arrive in layers. First comes the unexpected name. Then comes the question of the sender. Then comes the realization that the sender may know something. Then another detail appears, and suddenly an old memory makes sense. It is almost like watching a cinematic story where one scene changes the meaning of the previous scene. You thought you understood what happened, and then a new piece of information changes the entire emotional context. Perhaps that is about to happen in your situation. Maybe there is a second message you have not received yet. Maybe the sender will explain why they mentioned your soulmate. Maybe another person will casually reveal a detail that connects everything. Maybe your soulmate will eventually say something that confirms why their name appeared. Or perhaps the answer will arrive through a completely unexpected conversation. The important thing is not to force the outcome. Let information arrive naturally. Your role is awareness, not pursuit. There is a difference between being curious and becoming consumed by uncertainty. Curiosity asks, what could this mean? Fear asks, what if I lose something? Curiosity leaves room for new information. Fear tries to create an answer before the facts arrive. Choose curiosity. It will allow you to remain open without surrendering your balance. Your soulmate's name appearing in a strange message does not require you to make a sudden decision. It simply gives you something worth observing. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this story is that your soulmate may also be experiencing a moment of recognition. Maybe they have recently realized that certain connections cannot be measured only by distance or silence. Maybe they have begun asking themselves whether the future they imagined still feels complete without considering you. Maybe they are not ready to speak yet, but they are becoming more honest with themselves. A person can change internally long before anyone else sees the evidence. That internal change may eventually create external movement. Consider how often people wait for certainty before allowing themselves to act. They wait for the perfect message, the perfect moment, the perfect sign. But life rarely works that way. Sometimes clarity grows through imperfect conversations. Sometimes a meaningful connection begins with an awkward sentence. Sometimes the first step is not a confession but a simple question. The strange message may represent exactly that kind of beginning. Something small enough to appear accidental, yet significant enough to make you reconsider what you thought was finished. There may also be a hidden emotional reason why your soulmate's name appeared through someone else instead of directly from them. Direct communication requires vulnerability. Indirect communication can feel safer. A person who is uncertain may talk to a friend first. They may ask questions without revealing the full reason. They may mention someone casually to see how another person responds. This does not mean every indirect mention is a secret message. It simply means human beings often approach meaningful subjects gradually. If your soulmate has been uncertain about you, the sender may have become part of that gradual process without even realizing how important their message would become. Now ask yourself something that may feel surprisingly powerful. If the message had never appeared, would you still be thinking about your soulmate in the same way? Maybe the answer is yes. Maybe the name simply exposed something that was already present. You may have been quietly wondering about them for a long time. You may have been waiting for a reason to believe that the connection still mattered. The message did not create the feeling. It revealed it. And that distinction can help you understand yourself more clearly. Because your future should not depend on chasing a mysterious clue. Your future should be built on awareness, self-respect, honest communication, and choices that reflect who you are becoming. If your soulmate is truly meant to share a meaningful chapter with you, that chapter will eventually require more than signs. It will require real actions from real people. That is where mystery becomes reality. The strange message may open the door, but eventually someone has to walk through it. And there is another fascinating possibility. The person who sent the message may have been trying to tell you something without realizing that they were revealing more than intended. Perhaps the wording contained a small detail about your soulmate's current situation. Maybe they mentioned a place your soulmate has been visiting. Maybe they referred to a future plan. Maybe they spoke about a conversation that had happened recently. Any of those details could become important later. Sometimes the truth is hidden not inside the biggest sentence, but inside the smallest one. So if you remember the message, remember it carefully. Not obsessively, but accurately. What exactly did it say? What words were used? What was the context? What happened immediately before it arrived? What happened afterward? Did the sender behave differently? Did another person mention your soulmate? Did you experience a sudden change in your own thoughts? These questions can help separate what actually happened from what your imagination may have added later. Clarity becomes easier when you respect both intuition and evidence. And now the story is approaching a moment where the mystery begins to turn. The sender may not have been the final person connected to this message. There may have been another conversation behind it, one that explains why your soulmate's name entered your world through such an unusual route. Perhaps someone asked a question. Perhaps someone remembered a promise. Perhaps your soulmate spoke about a future possibility that included a person they once believed was out of reach. Before you move past this moment, hold on to one thought. Sometimes a strange message does not arrive to tell you what will happen. It arrives to prepare you to recognize what happens next. That is a very different kind of message. It does not give you the ending. It gives you awareness. And awareness can change the way you meet the future. The name you saw may have been only a few letters on a screen, but behind those letters could be memories, conversations, decisions, and possibilities you have not yet discovered. The sender may have believed they were simply sending information. Your soulmate may have believed they were simply talking about something personal. Yet somehow, the information traveled across those separate moments and reached you. Now the question becomes even more intriguing. What was said before the message was sent? What did your soulmate tell that person? And why did the sender choose to contact you at all? There is a reason that final piece matters, because once you understand what happened before the message, you may finally understand why your soulmate's name appeared in the first place. The answer may be closer than you think, but it is hidden inside a conversation that you were never supposed to hear. The mystery finally reaches its most revealing moment, because the strange message was never only about a name. It was about what that name awakened inside you, and what it made you notice about the future. The sender may have had a simple reason for reaching out, yet their message connected you to a possibility you had almost stopped considering. Perhaps your soulmate had mentioned you in a conversation, perhaps someone remembered the connection between you, or perhaps the message was simply an unexpected coincidence. But regardless of how it began, it brought one truth into focus. Some connections remain meaningful because they teach us something about who we are becoming. You do not need to force an answer, chase a person, or turn uncertainty into certainty. Let what is genuine reveal itself through time, honesty, and real actions. If this story touched something within you, feel free to share your thoughts, leave a comment, and stay connected for more stories about mysterious connections, emotional timing, and the possibilities hidden inside ordinary moments. And remember this: the future does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through one unexpected sentence, one familiar name, or one message that makes you pause. Maybe this was not the final answer. Maybe it was simply the first glimpse of a new chapter. What matters now is that you remain open, aware, and ready for whatever truth unfolds naturally. The strange message may disappear from your screen, but the question it created may stay with you for a while. Who sent it, and why? Perhaps one day you will look back and realize that the real purpose was not to reveal someone else's secret. It was to remind you that your story is still moving, your future is still unwritten, and the most unexpected moment can sometimes become the beginning of something you never saw coming.